But guys, so many headlines from the Berkshire meeting, Jim. I know you talked about a couple of them, but SPACs, Bitcoin, Apple, buybacks, climate, where do you begin?
Well, I do think that we have to talk about the individual investor, the youthful individual investor, and I'm going to take it head on here. Look, obviously, I respect those two men, as everyone else does, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger. You have to. But I found, I agree with Vlad Tenev and Robinhood when I say that it was insulting. Now, maybe it was meant to insult. Maybe it was too sweeping. But I think that when those gentlemen blast a company that has actually brought millions of people in, some of these people are investors. And not all of them are in casino or call buyers. And David, I think that there's a sense of contempt for change. And these people are part of a change and a democratization that I am not going to criticize.
When you talk about that, or when you say that there's some contempt for that, is there anything in particular that comes out of the various comments that were made by Mr. Buffett?
There was a very good comment about short-term Apple call buying. I do think that there's too much call buying. I also think that if you rely on what people say is where they get their ideas, Wall Street bets, that means that you've bought GameStop and you've bought AMC. Right. There really isn't much more to it. So, David, my take is that we're not getting the correct sample, and that both men have contempt for millions of people who are smarter than having money in a checking account. And they're trying, and you don't want to discourage them. But if you listen to these two, I think you find that they've attacked a generation as fools. And I disagree with that.
Carl, yeah, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, I mean, Robinhood's statement, if you haven't heard it so far this morning, is if the last year has taught us anything, it's that people are tired of the Warren Buffetts and Charlie Mungers of the world acting like they're the only oracles of investing. If you missed what the two said over the weekend, take a listen to this.
I do want to see how they handle the source of income when they say they don't charge the customer or anything. I mean, it'll just be interesting to watch how they describe it. I mean, but they have attracted, maybe set out to attract, but they have attracted. I think I read where 12 or 13% of their casino participants were dealing in puts and calls. I looked up on Apple's, the number of 7-day calls and 14-day calls outstanding, and I'm sure a lot of that is coming through Robinhood. That's a bunch of people writing. They're gambling on the price of Apple over the next 7 days or 14. There's nothing, there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing immoral. But I don't think you'd build a society around people doing it.
Interesting, guys. Some of our viewers are writing in this morning, David, sort of defending Buffett,
right,
saying Buffett doesn't know my order flow, he doesn't sell my order flow, and he doesn't shower me with gimmicks to get me to engage.
Yep, that's all true. And I mean, Jim, listen, we've talked a lot about the gamification of these apps, and Robinhood in particular. You also made a perfectly valid point about their business model, which has potentially changed to some extent since the GameStop fiasco, when they were more or less out of business if they didn't raise $3 billion.
They didn't have the controls.
There is no doubt that there's a level of speculation there.
I'm not
isn't there that their participants engage in that you can't fully disagree. But what is it that you take issue with then?
I think that that's a sample, a smaller group. I think it's more anecdotal than empirical. I think that we need to encourage younger people to get in, and we need to help them. I actually think that what we do here as a network is antithetical to exactly what Buffett and Munger said. So I'm not going into what their view is. I mean, we try very hard to educate,
right?
All of us, and it's got some power. We should not just sit here. If we're just going to tell people they should be in index funds, then I think we miss great opportunities for people. I think of all the stories you broke. If people are watching what you have to say, do I think that they're foolish taking action? I think the opposite.
No.
I think that what we do, Carl, as a network is admirable. It's to help a lot of the people from Robinhood be better. I don't think that they necessarily have to self-immolate. They're not people who shower themselves with gasoline and light a fire. There's a lot of people, I think, who have watched us. And again, I want to bring us into the debate. I spent my life trying to educate these people. Now, you could say, listen, that's a life unlearned and a life that's stupid. I look at it, Carl, I've probably talked to thousands of investors, far more than these two gentlemen, other than the people who are long Buffett, long Warren Buffett, long Berkshire. And, Carl, I find it denigrating. I find it patronizing. And I know you're not supposed to criticize these two gentlemen. I know they're supposed to be above criticism. But they directly attacked a wave of investing, Carl, that I'm very excited about. And there will be people who get blown out.
Do you consider, Jim, do you consider 7-day calls investing?
No, that's not investing. That's stupid. Do I consider that's what everybody's doing? Absolutely not. Do I consider when people call in and ask me about it? Now, you could say that's anecdotal, too. Well, I don't know, after 16 years and thousands of shows, I'm more empirical than those gentlemen. David, I just think that we have millions of people who are finding their way, and some are going to make big mistakes. They always have.
But those who would use the app on a daily basis and treat it almost in the same way that they would a betting app.
That's foolish.
Yeah.
But they'll get blown out. But there'll be some of the millions, whom I think will buy Berkshire Hathaway.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.